This is Glass City Humanist on WAKT Radio. This is a show talking about topics of the day from a secular and humanist value perspective. Here is your host, Douglas Berger.
In this episode, we take a deep dive on diversity, equity, and inclusion, better known by bigoted people as DEI. Then we look at how in vitro fertilization is causing some ironic responses from the anti-abortion crowd. Then we wrap up with a recent visit by author Kate Cohen, talking about her book, We of Little Faith, Why I Stopped Pretending to Believe, and Maybe You Should Too.
Glass City Humanist is an outreach of the secular humanists of Western Lake Erie, building community with reason and compassion for a better tomorrow. Views expressed on the Glass City Humanist are not necessarily those of Sholey or WAKT Radio.
Just the other day, one of the candidates that's running for the 9th Congressional District here in Ohio, J.R. Majewski, who inflated his military record the last time he ran and got caught, got in trouble again for something that he said. According to the news report in a podcast, Mr. Majewski compared arguments on the internet to people participating in the Special Olympics with an ableist slur. And they quoted him saying, "No matter how hard you try, arguing on the internet is like being in the Special Olympics," Mr. Majewski said. "No matter how good you perform, you're still expletive R word at the end of the day." And he used the R word. Well, I had heard about this on, might have been Twitter or something first. And then it kind of got filtered into the newspapers and the media, and he took some pretty nasty slapbacks about it. Because that's the thing is, no matter what you think of, most of the people, you don't disparage people with cognitive disabilities, like Donald Trump. I'm sorry, that was a Freudian slip. I apologize. But yeah, you don't disparage people with cognitive disabilities. You especially don't use the R word, ever. That's as bad as the C word for women and the N word for African Americans. You just don't do it. And he did it because he was probably on a show. I don't know, that it was called the Trifecta Hour. It's probably a conservative show. Who knows? And so it raised a big enough stink that on Sunday, he issued an apology on video. And it's one of those classic non-apology apologies. He's like, "I'm not a career politician. I make mistakes, and sometimes I say the wrong things. But I also hold myself accountable when I make mistakes." And then he talks about how he disparages people with special needs. "That wasn't my intention. However, I did say some things that I regret." And then he also said, "I apologize for people that may have been offended by what I said." See, that's a non-apology apology. Because you're putting it on the person who was offended. And if he's holding himself accountable, he shouldn't have said it that way. He just should have said that I made a mistake, I'm sorry. That's all he needed to say. But what was even better was I saw they had on WTOL Channel 11 News. They did a whole segment about it, and they had responses from other people, other politicians. And so they had like Derek Marin. "Oh, he said something bad. He shouldn't have said that." But the best one was Gary Click. Now, why they reached out to him for a comment, I have no idea. So my guess is he probably sent in issued a press release or something. But he was talking about how do you say it? People know who you are by what you say, or some bull crap like that. But it was just so hilariously ironic coming from Click, who has said so many nasty things about trans kids as he worked on his bill to ban gender-affirming care. Oh, he was awful. Just said so many awful things about trans kids. And he's trying to trying to backslap J.R. Majewski for using the R word. It's just classic hypocrite. Classic hypocritical Christian. And it just cracked me up. So I'm probably going to look for it, and I'm going to play at least the audio of that news report, because it just, I'm just laughing again just thinking about it.
State Representative Gary Click took to X saying, quote, "I am a personal believer in forgiveness 100%. I truly hope J.R. Majewski learns the character traits of discretion, discernment, and kindness. However, history tells us there will be another thing to apologize for, and then something after that. The 9th District cannot afford to have the next George Santos, even if he could beat Captor." The statement continues, "It's time to take a step back, J.R. Majewski. Stop making excuses and do the right thing. Stepping down will demonstrate you really do understand." Now, we reached out to Congresswoman Captor's office for a response. We have yet to hear back. We also asked the candidates vying for her seat to weigh in on this ordeal. So far, we got a response from one of them. State Representative Derek Merritt says, quote, "His cruel comments are a disgrace. They denigrate human life and are reprehensible," end quote.
This is Glass City Humanist on WAKT Radio. For more information about the topics in this episode, please visit glasscityhumanist.show.
Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit today about an issue that is currently at the forefront of the Christian nationalist, religious conservative, political conservative nexus. Before they went after trans kids, before that, CRT, book bannings, book bannings, etc., etc. And one of the things that they absolutely hate, just absolutely hate, is what's called DEI. Diversity, equity, inclusion. Here in Ohio, there's a current state law under consideration that would prohibit universities in Ohio from having anything to do with DEI. And you're probably asking yourself, but Doug, DEI is a good thing. Diversity is good, equity is good, inclusion is good. Yes, they are good, but the conservatives have turned those three letters into a slur, like they did with CRT. I can promise you this, that they really don't know what DEI is. They assume that it is against white people, and these are people that are really upset because they can't use the N-word anymore. It's a simple fact, because it's usually the old white people that are upset with DEI. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about what DEI is, what it really is, so that maybe if it comes up in conversation, that you might know people that start off spouting off about that DEI, oh, I hate that. Well, then you'd be better informed. Because I'd rather have people better informed than hurting people. And so kind of what I wanted to do first is I wanted to play a clip. Well, it's a really short video from this YouTube channel called The Root. And it's African-American based YouTube channel, fronted, and they talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and kind of give they call it a cheat sheet. So they kind of give a short definition of it. So I'll go ahead and play that, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
Every industry these days is using the term DEI to explain why they are appointing diversity officers, carrying out diversity training, and discussing ways to be more inclusive. But what really is DEI, and why is it necessary? DEI is short for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Here's a breakdown. Diversity is ensuring the representation of all identifiers across races, gender identities, sexual orientations, religions, political beliefs, socioeconomic statuses, and more. Equity is the fair treatment of all previously stated identifiers, making sure every person in the environment has the same opportunities, resources, and support. Inclusion is making sure that the space is comfortable and welcoming to every type of person present. Everybody should feel respected and valued. Host of the 2023 Golden Globe Awards, Gerard Carmichael, included in his opening monologue that the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, the group of journalists that decide the nominees and the winners of the Golden Globes, didn't have a single Black journalist in the association until after George Floyd died. The last time there was a Black member was in 2002. This means that the Golden Globes nominations and voting were missing out on Black voices that could have contributed to helping Black films and shows get nominated and win awards.
There's a myth that we aren't innovative and that we don't bring innovative solutions. We are the most creative people. If you look at Google's YouTube platform, Black creators use YouTube not just to innovate, it's monetized. We also network there, and we have built our businesses from entertainment to the arts to science and engineering using a highly creative platform.
DEI is put in place to avoid these situations. It is implemented to make sure that from the very beginning, all types of people get the chance to be in the room and make the decisions. Like Google's Chief Diversity Officer, Melanie Parker. For more topics from our cheat sheet series, visit theroot.com. I'm Amira Castilla.
Okay, once again, that was The Root, and I'll have a link to their channel up in the show notes so you can check it out. So they gave a pretty good summary of what DEI is, just so that, in case you weren't following along, or maybe you had you were looking away, maybe you went to the bathroom. But basically, there are three components. There's diversity, the presence and participation of individuals with varying backgrounds and perspectives, including those who have been traditionally underrepresented. Equity is equal access to opportunities and fair, just, and impartial treatment. And inclusion is a sense of belonging in an environment where all feel welcomed, accepted, and respected. Now, as a humanist, I agree with these points 100%. And it's really important to me that a lot of companies and public entities are putting this into action, that they're trying to work on being more diverse, more equitable, and more inclusive. Because I think it's very important. Because when you have a people, when you have a community of people with all different experiences, all different life experiences, all different voices, you know that to have the best outcomes, to have a great community, you need to include everybody. You need to include white cisgendered men. You need to include trans women. You need to include African American women. You need to include people from Central America. Wherever you can, you've got to do it. Now, most people who are opposed to DEI believe that it is being racist towards white people. And that is not the case at all. It has nothing to do with it, because white is a race. So it would be included in diversity. What a lot of these people that are opposed DEI, what they're really upset about is that white people are losing their special privileges. Then you have other people that are upset about DEI because they equate it with affirmative action. And people who are bigoted towards affirmative action, they believe affirmative action gives people who are not qualified other people's jobs who are qualified, which is not the case. And that's definitely not how DEI works. Affirmative action says that in a pool of qualified candidates, the company would hire the candidate that best meets the need to be diverse. So if you have a pool of candidates where you have 5 men and 3 women qualified for the job, and you want to increase the number of women in your workplace, then you would choose the best candidate from the group of women, from the group of 3 women. DEI is where you make sure you have policies and other processes in place that include all the different people in your company. And there have been dozens of studies that have shown that companies that have strong DEI objectives and use them do better and are more profitable. And if you have colleges or universities that have a strong DEI objectives, they tend to be better places. They are able to attract more and more students. And so why then are right-wingers so opposed to DEI? Well, like I said, most of the people that are opposed to DEI are white men, old white men. And they are afraid of losing their special place that they assume that they have because they're old white men. That used to be the default. For example, if you are a business owner and you tend to hire people who are like yourself, you are not contributing to your company's DEI objectives. So basically, for equity in the workplace, what you want to do is you want to have equal opportunities, fair compensation, and balanced training and educational opportunities. I was just watching a documentary the other night on PBS about flight attendants and the history of flight attendants and how they struggled to, one, get rid of the sexism inherent in being a flight attendant, and being able to then have better equity and better diversity and inclusion in the airline industry. Because when the flight attendant was originally conceived, they were a nurse. They were used as nurses on flights because, at the time, people thought that they'd have medical challenges for people that were flying. And this is in the when regular air transportation started taking off in the 30s and 40s. So they would have these women on board that were nurses, medically trained nurses. And that kind of bled into the history of the airline industry, where you would have these nurses and they controlled everything about these women. They could only be a certain weight. They had to be a certain height. They couldn't be married. They couldn't have children. They couldn't wear slacks. They had to wear skirts. They couldn't wear hose because that was a fire hazard, but they had to wear skirts. And they were all women. Airlines did have a male flight attendant, but he was called a purser. And usually the male pursers made more money. So, this documentary I was watching on PBS was talking about the flight attendants getting unionized and getting collectively bargaining and some of their stories. So that is where DEI plays a part, where you have these stodgy old white men who won't let a woman who's married and who may not weigh a particular certain amount, and you discriminate against her, you're hurting your company, especially if you're doing it nowadays in 2024. So being, diversity, equity, and inclusion is very important, and it's something that we need to all fight in support of if we want to have a compassionate world to live in. This isn't negative. DEI is not negative. It's only negative because the right-wingers are against it. And I think that needs to change.
This is Glass City Humanist on WAKT Radio. For more information about the topics in this episode, please visit glasscityhumanist.show.
during the struggle to protect abortion rights here in Ohio, and one of the things that was used, one of the arguments was used and is covered under what ended up being State Issue 1 that protected reproductive rights here in Ohio, was protecting people who decided to use in vitro fertilization, also known as IVF. And that's a process of fertilization where an egg is combined with sperm in vitro, or in glass, and it involves growing the embryo, deciding if it's viable or not. Then it's implanted back into a womb. It could either be the womb of the person that donated the egg, or it could be another womb, like you donate it to somebody else. And this is a process that's been going on for almost 50 years, 40 some odd years, since the late 70s, that is used for couples who cannot conceive. They cannot have children for one reason or another. And this is one of the techniques that has been used. It's scientifically sound. It's been used for decades. It's very expensive. And in many cases, insurance isn't required to cover it, but a lot of insurance companies do. It's still something that, you have to have the money to do it. And I know I've had friends and family members I've known who have gone through this process, and they've had like GoFundMe pages to raise money to do it, because it's thousands and thousands of dollars to go through this process. And that was one of the things that, as I said, is covered under the new Reproductive Rights Act. And the reason being is because Christian nationalists and evangelical Christians and some Catholics are opposed to IVF. They are of the mind that you're messing with God's plan. And if God had wanted you to have a baby, you would have a baby. And if you are not having a baby, there's a reason why you're not having a baby, and God has decided that for you. And so if you're using science against the will of God, that has to be stopped. And that's why that was included in State Issue 1, was because that would be something that they probably would try to go after if they were able to ban abortion. If they weren't able to ban abortion, they might go after it. And so basically this has happened, not in Ohio, but in Alabama. There was an Alabama Supreme Court decision the week of the 20th, February the 20th, that said that embryos that are frozen for IVF treatments are children under Alabama law. And it says, and this happened on the 20th, I believe, and it was by a 7-2 vote of the Alabama Supreme Court. And it involves an Alabama law called the Wrongful Death of a Minor Act. The act allows the parent of a deceased child to collect punitive damages against a party who causes the death of a minor child through negligence. And what had happened was that some plaintiffs in a court case had already conceived several children through IVF. And the way the process works is they collect many eggs, they fertilize many eggs, but they freeze the ones that they don't use, so that maybe in a future time they either use those eggs or maybe they're donated to somebody else. But they're kept in cryogenic stasis for years. There was a report when I was reading up on this information that there was a baby that was born recently that had been an embryo frozen for 27 years. So, like I said, the science on this is pretty solid, that we can freeze embryos, and pretty much all the studies so far have shown that there's no negative effects of doing so. But what had happened was at this fertility clinic that was in this hospital, a patient in the hospital had broken into the clinic through an unsecured door that they didn't know about at the time. They had opened up the cryogenic freezer, taken some of the embryos out, And because they're frozen with nitrogen, you just can't touch them with your bare hand. And they tried to do that and dropped it, and it broke and damaged all the embryos that were in this little vial that was being frozen. And that's what the plaintiffs then sued the hospital for wrongful death of a minor. And it went to appeals court, and the judge sided with the hospital and said that embryos that are frozen like that are not children, and so they're not covered under this law. But then the Alabama Supreme Court came back and said that the embryos qualified as children. And it says the majority declared that the natural, ordinary, commonly understood meaning of the word child includes embryos, which the opinion dubbed extrauterine children, children outside the uterus. Incredibly, the majority said that this was true, and here's the clincher, when the Wrongful Death of a Minor Act was passed in 1872. Now again, IVF didn't exist as a viable scientific treatment for infertility until 1978. And this law, Wrongful Death of a Minor Act, was passed in 1872. And it said that's because, and this is their explanation, the majority, according to the majority, state lawmakers of the 1870s believed that the unborn qualified as full legal persons, no matter their physical location. That is, inside a biological uterus or a cryogenic nursery. And it said that the holding has its own terrifying implications for IVF in Alabama. It means that a medical professional who inadvertently damages or destroys a microscopic embryo has maimed or killed a legal person and is on the hook for punitive damages that could run into the millions. And clinics simply cannot bear this crushing liability because a lot of times not all of the embryos are used. Sometimes the embryos are destroyed, either because they weren't viable, they weren't because they grade them before they implant them, or through some kind of process, medical process, in the freezing process, they don't survive. And so what this does then is that several, I think at least 3 fertility clinics in Alabama now have suspended IVF treatments. The Attorney General for Alabama claims that he would refuse to prosecute any doctor or hospital that does IVF treatment under this law, but we have to take his word for it. And I don't think, I wouldn't trust it. If I was a clinic, I wouldn't trust his word for it. So how does this come into play with humanism, for one thing, and separation of church and state? Well, they had a judge who did a concurrence. Now, the majority decision was 7-2, and they used a lot of legal terms to say that an embryo had the same right, should have the same rights as a child, a baby that has been born. And so in a concurrence, Chief Justice Tom Parker spelled out the implications. He said, the people of Alabama have adopted the theologically based view that life cannot be wrongly destroyed without incurring the wrath of a holy God. As a result, Parker continued, the courts have an affirmative duty to protect, quote, the unborn, unquote, including embryos. Any law that risks the deaths of these little people is constitutionally suspect. Courts may not engage in the business of carving out an exception for the people in this case, small as they were. This reasoning on its own terms applies to criminal laws with the exact same force as civil laws, and it means, Parker added, that even if the Alabama legislature wanted to legalize IVF as it's currently practiced, the state constitution would prohibit from doing so. because the Alabama Constitution has a clause in it about the sanctity of life that protects the born and the unborn child. So you're talking theocracy right now. They are making laws based on their religious beliefs. It's not any different than what the Taliban did in Afghanistan. It doesn't have anything different than what the Ayatollah did in Iran. When you make laws based on your religious beliefs, you're creating a theocracy. Because it's one thing to ignore scientists when they say you really should wear a mask to prevent disease. It's quite another to say that embryos that can be frozen and survive are people too, with all of that. And it's like, as some of the commentary I've read has asked, well, the person that dropped these embryos, can't they be charged with murder? That's an interesting question that needs to be answered. But they won't answer it because all they want to do is they just want to stop messing with God's plan. And however they do it, that's how they're going to do it. Now, one of the things you need to do also is understand how IVF actually is practiced. Doctors retrieve eggs, they fertilize them with sperm, they create as many embryos as possible and then freeze them. The embryos are rated for quality. Higher quality embryos are thawed and transferred into the uterus. Multiple embryos are often transferred during each cycle in the hopes that at least one will result in a live birth. And some couples, they do this process multiple times. And this is the standard of care for IVF. Has been for decades. The mainstream medical establishment universally agrees that this method is in the best interest of the patient. Now, Chief Justice Parker says that method is unconstitutional because it does not sufficiently protect embryos from being killed. Although the majority is subtler, it's a clear implication of its opinion too. So Parker lays out his alternative about how you can still have IVF and not be killing embryos unnecessarily. And what he says is that doctors must create just one embryo at a time. And each embryo, no matter how poor in quality, must be transferred. And only one embryo may be transferred at a time. And if the cycle fails, the whole process must start all over again. And it says that each cycle can cost up to $30,000. So Parker's method would force patients, the ones who can afford it, to undergo doomed single embryo transfers one by one. And it's just like, it's people who are not medical doctors, who don't understand how this process works, getting in between you and your doctor. It's as simple as that, and it's theatrical, based in religion, which even makes it even worse. There has been some pushback from conservative politicians, which kind of amazed me a little bit. Even the former president Donald Trump is supporting IVF. He said we have to have more children. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to play a couple of clips. The first one is Alabama, U.S. Senator from Alabama, Tommy Tuberville. He's a former football coach. And the news media for lack of a better word, ambushed him at a conservative convention somewhere and asked him about this ruling. And you can tell he has no idea what he's talking about. And one of the things that he points out, he says, we've got to have more children. We've got to make it easier for people to have more children. But he agreed with the Alabama court case ruling. And then the other clip is going to be very, very ironic. So we'll get to that after we talk about Tommy Tuberville.
Reaction to the Alabama Supreme Court ruling on the fact that embryos are children?
Yeah, I was all for it. We need to have more kids. We need to have an opportunity to do that. And I thought this was the right thing to do. But
IVF is used to have more children, and right now IVF services are paused at some of the clinics in Alabama. Aren't you concerned that this could impact people who are trying to have kids?
Well, that's for another conversation. People need to have that. We need more kids. We need the people to have the opportunity to have kids.
Senator, what do you say to the women right now in Alabama who no longer have access to IVF, or who will not, as a result of this ruling? What do you say to them?
Well, that's a hard one. It really is. It's really hard. Because, again, you want people to have that opportunity. And that's what I was telling her. We need more kids.
Yeah, I was really pleased as punch when that reporter said, well, IVF is about having children, helps people have children. And then he's like, well, that's a difficult thing to talk about. He doesn't have a clue. Never read the ruling. You know, this happened in Alabama. It was big news. Not as big as news as when people found out about it. And you would have thought that maybe somebody on his staff had briefed him about it. And you could tell he had no idea. And that's a lot of things with these Christian nationalists. They don't know how actual science works. They don't know how technology works. All they know is when they are against it or when they support it. And that's all that matters to them. Now, the next clip I want to play is kind of ironic. It is a presidential candidate, well, pseudo-presidential candidate, Nikki Haley, is they are in South Carolina at the time that I'm recording this for the South Carolina primary. And she may have dropped out by the time you see this segment. Who knows? But I just thought that her answer, one of the answers she gave to the IVF question, was very ironic.
How should Republicans talk about IVF treatments?
What I will say is, don't have a knee-jerk reaction over this. We want to make sure embryos are protected. This decision needs to be decided between the parents and the physicians, no one else. Government doesn't need to start intruding into this.
This is Glass City Humanist on WAKT Radio.
Washington Post columnist and author Kate Cohen visited our Showley meeting in January via Zoom, talking about her book, We of Little Faith, Why I Stopped Pretending to Believe, and Maybe You Should Too.
I'm going to start with telling you about my book. This is We of Little Faith, Why I Stopped Pretending to Believe, and Maybe You Should Too. And it's really a book, I think, about honesty. It's about why I wasn't honest about my beliefs for many years, why I decided to start being honest, and then what happened. And so I think it's probably something that you can all relate to. We'll talk about it afterward, but I feel like a lot of people have the experience of keeping their true beliefs to themselves. And so I wanted to write about that experience and what changed in me to make me a little bit more forthcoming, and then a lot more forthcoming. And the story begins as when I was a child, and I was raised in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, which is a lovely, lovely place, very Christian. My sisters and I were the only Jews in my elementary school. And I was raised Reformed Jewish. And there was a synagogue in the next bigger town. And we really did all the things. We really did. We went to synagogue. We did a weekly Shabbat dinner with my family. We lit the candles. And I went to Sunday school. I learned some Hebrew. I then became bat mitzvah. My sisters and I all became bat mitzvah. And I don't know how much anybody knows about the Jewish liturgy, but basically what you're doing throughout all of the things that I just mentioned is you're praising God. I mean, every single prayer almost is a prayer in praise of God. And this entire time as I was growing up, I did not ever really believe that God was real. I thought of God as a very entertaining, somewhat cruel literary character, a fiction. I thought of God as a cultural construct. I mean, I didn't say that to myself at age 8, but that is really kind of how I thought of it. Something that this is what Jews do. But I didn't think he was real. I didn't think he was listening to me as I prayed and sang prayers and prayed some more and led prayers as a young bat mitzvah. So that whole time up until I left for college, I was thinking inside that I didn't believe what the people around me believed. But I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell my parents that. I didn't ask them what they believed. I didn't have this conversation with my rabbis or my Sunday school teachers, anybody. And I really do think this is a common experience. When you find yourself having having thoughts and feelings you assume other people don't share, as a kid especially, who wants to get along with other people and be a good girl. I want to be a good girl. You keep it to yourself. So I did. And then in college and after college, I would say I did more than just kind of keep it to myself. There were times when I was actively deceiving the people in my life. I deceived my college. I petitioned to get out of the meal plan because I, pretended that I wanted to keep kosher. This is the most embarrassing part of the book. And I was writing a book about my relatives right after college. I was writing a book about relatives who survived the Holocaust in Italy. And I went and lived with the two members of the family who were still alive. And I absolutely pretended to them that I was more of a believer than I actually was. I wanted them to feel safe with me and to like me. And I was afraid that if I told them what I really thought, they wouldn't, So I would say at no point, and I recognize the irony of what I'm about to say. I recognize the irony when I was writing this book about the Holocaust. At no point was I in any danger. If I had said what I really thought, I would have been fine, And I think a lot of people, when they keep their non-belief a secret, that, what they're risking isn't the kinds of things that you might be risking in countries where there are blasphemy laws, where you could actually be imprisoned or even executed for being an atheist. I was risking social disapproval. I was risking awkward conversations. I didn't want to hurt people's feelings. So I think this is a kind of a common thing. And, in our country, as I'm sure you have gathered, I was a very smart student. I could read context clues. there is this assumption that whatever you believe, you definitely believe in the higher power of some sort. We all believe in God. We all share this belief. Our money says, "In God we trust." Our little pledge says, "Under God." Every politician ends their speeches with, "God bless America." So, I clocked all that, as we all do, and I made the decision that nobody, it wasn't anybody's business what I really believed, and it was fine if they thought that I could say I was Jewish, and they could think whatever that meant about what I thought about God. So that went on until through a Jewish wedding, which where we sort of turned down the God parts, but we didn't get rid of them altogether. Married my husband, and everything changed for me when I had children, which, I think is a time that a lot of people change their attitude towards religion. A lot of people who maybe didn't go to church when they were in college, or after college as a young adult, they didn't pay much attention to it. They have kids, and then all of a sudden, feeling the responsibility to those kids, they think, okay, I got to get back to religion. I got to get back to the faith that I was raised in. I have to do it to be a good parent. And for me, it was like the same thing, but the opposite. It was, I can't raise these people to whom I am utterly responsible and who are completely dependent on me. I can't raise them to believe something that I don't believe. I can't teach them something that I think is false. And they're trying to work out how the world works. Their little brains are building a model of the world, second by second. And it's my job to help them and not to put anything in the way of that project that they were doing. So that was the big turning point for me, was when I had kids, and I resolved I wasn't going to tell them anything that I didn't think was true. I was going to tell them what I thought was true, which was that God is a human invention, something that people made up. And I'm going to read you a little bit from my book, if you don't mind. So this is our story time portion. But you'll give you a sense of that sort of moment, and also kind of how I write and what sort of things I think about. So here we go. This is from the chapter called Thunderbolt. In fact, it's the entire chapter, and you'll see it's quite short, which I believe is one of the hallmarks of a good book. It should have short chapters and not be very long. Okay. I can tell you the exact moment when I started to raise my children as atheists. It didn't feel momentous at the time, but it was a moment. Noah was 5, Jesse was 3, and we were sitting on the couch reading from D'Aulaire's Book of Greek Myths, a holdover from my childhood bookshelf. Those illustrations really freaked me out as a kid. It's one thing to read that Cronus ate his babies, but it's quite another to see it. So naturally, I had to share the experience with my boys. One of the boys asked what a myth was, and I told him it was a story about how the world works. People used to believe that these gods were in charge of what happened on Earth. And these stories helped explain things they didn't understand, like winter or stars or thunder. See, look, I flipped ahead to find a picture. Zeus has a thunderbolt. They don't believe them anymore? No, I said. That's why they call it myth. When people still believe it, they call it religion. like the stories about God and Moses that we read at Passover, or the ones about Jesus and Christmas. They're just made up stories, like myths, but people still believe them. Here's how the Dolores book begins. In olden times, when men still worshipped ugly idols, there lived in the land of Greece a folk of shepherds and herdsmen who cherished light and beauty. They did not worship dark idols like their neighbors, but created instead their own beautiful, radiant gods. Every people creates its own gods, I said. The little warm bodies nodded, and we proceeded to Gaia and the Titans until I could feel Cronus lurking behind the next page. That was it, the big moment. I didn't set out to raise atheists per se. Before I had children, I certainly never planned to tell my children that religions were made up. I planned to read to them all the time and feed them food I made myself and make sure they wrote thank you notes. That was about it, except for one more thing. I planned to tell them the truth. So I told my kids the truth. And for a while, I only told my kids. I didn't tell anybody else. I don't know if any of you have kids, but when you are a young parent, there's something can be very isolating about it. And all I wanted to do was make connections with other people, make connections with other parents. And I really thought that if I told them what I really believed, or if I told them that I was an atheist, my goodness, use that word that is so scary, they wouldn't like me. They wouldn't want to, they wouldn't want to make friends. So I really just sort of kept my newfound, my newfound pledge of honesty, my newfound vow. I kept that within the home until my kids started to get older, and they magically transformed from people who don't judge you at all to people who are watching what you're doing and understanding when it doesn't match what you say. So those little rascals. I started to be honest, and it wasn't easy, I would say. I was quite tentative at first with the people that I was making my confession to. But it got easier and easier because every time I did it, I got incredible responses. I got people telling me that they also had doubts about religion. I got people telling me that they used religion just because their children were afraid and they wanted to give their children comfort. And I got people who were believers but wanted to talk about how they had been raised and what they thought God was or God meant. So far from my truth-telling being a cause of disruption or disapproval, I found that it was an incredible source of connection with other people. And I still, to this day, I'm amazed, and it's sort of ridiculous because by now I should know that little kid sitting in synagogue thinking, oh, I just think this is a character, but all these other people believe, I should know that I was wrong, that I wasn't alone. I just thought I was alone. And yet still to this day, I am surprised. I get people, colleagues of my mother's or cousins, on my dad's side or something, who will write to me and cheer me on and, tell me their stories. And I would have assumed that I would have been offending them or upsetting them. And now, of course, maybe some people are offended and upset and they're not the ones to write to me. That's okay. I'm okay with that. But mostly I am just over and over surprised at the response I've gotten, the rewards of being honest about being an atheist. And of course, to go back to the original reason that I did it, as a parent, I felt I've been so grateful for taking that path, because I think it's set for my children, my whole family, this standard of honesty and discussion, and the idea that if something's difficult, we'll talk it through. And it gave me permission to be honest, about my fears, or be honest about what I thought death was, or, help my children think through all the tough questions without having to work around the stuff that I'd been taught that I didn't really believe. So it was so rewarding, and I wanted to write a book that gave other people the courage to be honest about their non-belief. And that was the original idea behind We Have Little Faith. So that is part one. Part two addresses another reason I think people are reticent about speaking their truth. So the first reason is this fear of disapproval, this wanting to fit in a country that is at least ostensibly extremely religious compared to other Western democracies, and fear of ostracism, fear of the stigma of being an atheist. All very reasonable, but I wanted to give people the courage to take that leap and tell people what they believe, because I felt like that leap was worth it. And that they, the response they would get would be more positive than they thought.
Thank you for listening. For more information about the topics in this episode, please visit glasscityhumanist.show. Glass City Humanist is an outreach of the Secular Humanists of Western Lake Erie. Sholi can be reached at humanistswle.org. Glass City Humanist is hosted, written, and produced by Douglas Berger, and he's solely responsible for the content. Our theme music is Glass City Jam, composed using the Amplify Studio. See you next time.